first of all, let me give Nayoung a very welcome, a great welcome from IGP, because it is the second time I listened to Nayoung's lecture about Korean feminism, actually. And I found the first lecture so fascinating, although I've been involved in feminist activism in China for a few years. Still, there's a lot of knowledge that I was not aware of previously, and there are obviously similarities, but also differences between the feminist activist groups in China and in Korea, and the domestic politics and obstacles that we face are also slightly different. So Nayoung is a very famous feminist activist from South Korea. She is a co-founder of SHARE, that stands for Center for Sexual Rights and Reproductive Justice, and the co-chair of the Joint Action for Reproductive Justice. She has been working for the decriminalization of abortion since 2010, when the abortion issue has emerged as a social agenda in South Korea. She has also launched Joint Action for Reproductive Justice, or in short, SHARE, Joint Action for Reproductive Justice in 2017, and later founded SHARE, Center for Sexual Rights and Reproductive Justice in 2019, with other activists, lawyers, doctors, and researchers. She contributed a paper titled "The Role of Reproductive Justice Movements in Challenging South Korea's Abortion Plan," and I will share the title of this article that she wrote later in the chat box. She submitted this paper and it has been published by the Health and Human Rights Journal in 2019 with 2 other authors. Her main interests are sexual and reproductive health rights, queer activism, religious fundamentalism, specifically in Korea, and the reproductive justice movement and global activism. So without further ado, let's give Nayoung a very warm welcome, and I will let you start the lecture today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to see you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my presentation file now. Yes, can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, let's start. Yeah, I'm a queer feminist activist, and I'm working for SHARE, Center for Sexual Rights and Reproductive Justice. Today, I'm gonna share my presentation about the issues and context of the feminist movement in South Korea. I'm sure you've heard a lot of news about Korean feminist issues in recent years. In the last 5 to 6 years, mass rallies and feminist movements have been actively carried out in Korea on issues such as Me Too movement, the movement to eradicate cyber sexual violence, and the movement for the decriminalization of abortion. And all of these movements have brought about significant change with political and social influences. And also, I think you might have heard about some campaigns such as the Escape the Corset campaign and 4B campaign. The B of the 4B campaign means not in Chinese characters, as you know. So 4B means not marry, not sex, not date, not childbirth. Whereas we are also facing massive and serious backlashes in recent years. Perhaps the famous case you've come across recently was the attack on Ansan, the gold medalist in archery at the Tokyo Olympics. South Korean men demanded an apology and return of her gold medal, saying that Ansan is a feminist who is provoking male hatred. Reasons they considered Ansan as a feminist are she has short hair, and they are asserting some words she used on her Instagram are male mocking words. How is it possible? Can you understand this situation? No, actually, I don't understand either. However, this nonsensical collective backlash attack has grown in power over the past few years. In the case of Ansan, the Archery Association came forward and blocked their ridiculous request with a clear and resolute attitude. But so far, several companies and even government agencies have acknowledged and apologized for this kind of complaint. Before the Ansan incident, a conspiracy was spread that feminists put the specific hand shape in the advertisement to mock the small penis of Korean men. They complained to companies and government agencies that put this hand shape in their advertisement and received an apology from the companies and government agencies. They also urged the game company to terminate the contract for the regional woman voice actor, took a picture wearing t-shirts saying the girls do not need a prince. And they attacked certain female celebrities for following women's organizations on social media. I think the most important problem is that politicians are now actively using their anti-feminist logic and empowering them. Ahead of next year's presidential election, South Korea's huge two parties are following their anti-feminist logic to somehow secure their approval ratings. So the situation of the past few years cannot be properly understood simply by looking at how the power relationship between men and women differs, which one has more influence between feminism and backlash, or which issues are more important. In order to properly analyze the cause and future direction of the problem, it is necessary to understand the impact of the history of the political and economical changes and their context. So to this end, we will first examine the relationship between women and the feminism movement and political and economic changes in South Korea. Since I don't have much time, I'm going to give you this slides later, and I will keep it brief. In South Korea, around the democratization movement in June 1987, women's organizations were established as NGOs, and laws that ensure women's rights were enacted. From the mid-1990s, various activities based on gender politics started centered on universities, and many feminist activists in the form of cultural movements became very active. At the same time, in 1995, the World Conference on Women in Beijing was held. South Korea was also in such a global trend. Then in 1997, an event occurred that had a significant impact on the context of the topic we will discuss today. This is the IMF program. When South Korea was in a situation where it owed too much international debt and was unable to pay it, the International Monetary Fund intervened and changed Korea's economic structure and labor structure. And this changes not only the economy, but also had a very important impact on education and society. In a situation where many people lost their jobs and each had to survive, the political forces that fought against the military dictatorship in the past came to power for the first time. Meanwhile, from the Kim Dae-jung administration in 1998, the government began to institutionalize measures in accordance with international human rights norms. This was a very strategic change. On the one hand, it was an expression that the South Korean government will not stay in the past any longer and will follow an international standard of democratization. But at the same time, there is an aspect that acts as a means to uh, alleviate, alleviate social chaos in a situation in which many people lose their jobs and become economically difficult due to massive restructuring. The changes that show these ambivalences and contradictions are especially evident in institutional measures related to women's human rights. For example, in 1997 and 1998, after the IMF economic restructuring program, so many women lost their jobs and were subject to layoffs with a zero rank in layoffs. And many women have been insecure since then. Women were forced to work as irregular workers. However, at the same time, a presidential commission on women's affairs was established in 1998, and in 2001, it became a Ministry of Gender Equality. And in 2005, after a really long struggle of women, the Hoju system, in which the husbands and fathers are considered as the most dominant person in the family, was abolished from the Civil Act. The abolition of the Hoju system is a very important historical achievement of the Korean women's movement. However, as I mentioned earlier, these kinds of flows have been accompanied by economic and neoliberal changes, so they made very contradictory situations. It has created the illusion that we already achieved institutional equality in Korean society, and the women's social status and human rights have risen. But of course, it was not real. At the same time, the myth that women can always succeed in a market economy if they have the ability has grown amid the neoliberal economic changes. In these changes, the government-led institutionalization flows had a more important influences than the power of the grassroots movement. And as women increasingly compete in the meritocracy myth, interest in and influences on the women's movement and the feminist movement has greatly decreased. In fact, from the mid 2000s to the early in 2010, many feminist societies, clubs, and media in universities disappeared. However, in 2015, the stagnation of feminist movement was rapidly overturned. So now let's analyze some important background and context from 2015 onwards. The first point is that the change in the method of subjectivization following neoliberal economic changes had an important influence on the gender structure of Korean society. Previously, Korea's economic system was basically a structure in which male patriarchs act as breadwinners. So once a man got a job, he was guaranteed a full-time job for the rest of his life. And most jobs are given to male workers. Although women also worked for wages, their wage was regarded as just a supplementary income for the family. And the gaps in job security, promotion, and wages were very large because men were more important in society. So to educate their sons, parents made their daughters less educated and put them to low-paying jobs for their teens, from their teens. So after the restructuring in 1997, women were actually placed in a worse working position. But the problem is that men who were previously able to get stable jobs have also been placed in a very precarious position. Everyone was pushed to get a shift in their social status from their past economic and gender positions in order to make people suitable for this neoliberal system. The educational system was also changes in the past. In the past, only men who graduated from a good university had an advantage, but after neoliberal changes, Korean society continued to emphasize the meritocracy myth that as long as they have the ability, they can acquire as many certifications as possible and succeed. So it can be said that these changes have created a struggle over the shift in the status of gender sexuality. Men have experienced that their position of economic uh, superiority and power as a stable breadwinner is shaken, and women got a financial message, fictional message that they can succeed if they have the ability, regardless of gender. In fact, through the 2000s, the academic achievement of girls far surpasses that of boys. In the past, women could not go to school, received a poor education, and could not compete equally with men. But girls, more successful and have higher academic achievement from 2000, it created a social illusion that gender equality has already been achieved. However, in reality, as shown in this table, the male employment rate continued to remain at a similar level without significant change, while the female employment rate was maintained at less than half of the male employment rate. Until 2017, the female unemployment rate was also much higher than in 1999. 1999. And nevertheless, society has always considered men as the representative base of the youth unemployment rate and made women think as if they were taking their jobs from men. So the momentum for Korean women to break the illusion and speak up about this unequal reality in honest was the hashtag campaign I am a feminist in 2015. And the trigger of this campaign was this. One day, a teenage man appeared on Twitter saying that he will join ISIS because he hates Korean women and Korean feminists. This young man, who was called Kim Gun, actually went to Syria and joined ISIS. However, one famous male columnist wrote an article with this title about this situation. Kim Gun, who went to ISIS, is also a problem, but brainless feminism is more of a problem. So this sparked a huge outreach among women and led to a massive hashtag campaign to declare that I am a feminist through Twitter and social networking services. So many women have joined this hashtag campaign. Many women shared their stories with hashtags. They confessed that they thought they could get an achievement by using their capability in equal changes, but the reality wasn't. Meanwhile, an infectious disease called Middle East uh, respiratory syndrome, MERS, also created another momentum. At the beginning of the MERS epidemic, one male user posted on a large online community a post saying saying that the MERS infection started in Korea, because two women came back after their luxury camp tour from the Middle East. But it was not true. So seeing that, female users began to react in earnest. Then as more and more women gathered, the women users overtuned the Meris gallery and made an online community called Megalia by combining the Meris gallery with the name of the feminist novel Daughters of Igalia. The story of this novel is about the words that the status of men and women overturned. Women users started a counter attack called mirroring, which gives back the words that men tried to discriminate and stigmatize women to men by changing only the gender of the subject, just like a mirror. In reality, men's words were forced incitement, but women's words in attacks, mirroring attacks were real situations. Through this mirroring strategy, women showed a very serious reality that had not been revealed. The impact of this online community was very strong because women's anxiety and anger had already reached the uh, threshold. Meanwhile, attempts to control women's sexuality and body continued while blaming women for the low fertility. And an advertisement of a hospital in the upper left of the screen you see is saying that one of the reasons for increased rhinitis patients is that uh, is that cleaning has decreased due to women's uh, advancement into society. Research institutes affiliated with the Ministry of Health and Welfare suggested imposing higher taxes on people living alone as a measure against the low birth rate. And the government distributed a map showing the number of women of childbearing age in each region of the country. You know this song, side song, Gangnam Style, that once swept the world, has this lyrics, has this lyric, a woman who looks quiet but plays when she plays. So in the midst of such a change in social status, men asked women to take the message that women should be obedient and also should play with them sexually. In such a way, there was a culture in which men wanted to continue dominating the sexuality hierarchy. The Escape the Corset movement also started in this background because many women have thought that in order to succeed in the neoliberal competition, women should adopt this type of sexuality norm, even appeal their appearance as their own abilities. However, after 1915, as many women began to break out of this fiction, the Escape the Corset movement was favored by many young women. However, I think there are some critical points for this movement. I'll say this in I'll say this in the last part. And another feature of the feminist movement after 2015 is that the feminist campaigns were initiated primarily through online communities and social network services. In the past, the movement started mainly through student movement organizations, labor unions, political groups, and social movement groups. But after the 2000s, these online communities and social network services have had more influence. And as a kind of play culture and political background were intertwined, the variables of social opinion became very diverse. This is a phenomenon that appears not only in the popularization of the feminist movement, but also in the phenomenon of backlash. Online public opinions are characterized by the rapid spread of message depending on issues, and it can be widely influenced. Moreover, it is more concise, intuitive, and direct than the words of social movement organizations or academies. So people can participate more easily. However, it tends to focus on their direct interest rather than on social structure. In particular, the recent online culture is easy to incite because it is spread based on social network relationships and specific communities. And in the progress, fake news, fake news or exaggerated facts spread quickly. When an incitement that started just for fun or a joke begins to be organized through a close relationship, it can suddenly become serious social issues. The examples of backlash I mentioned at the beginning are such cases. Campaigns launched online in recent years have sparked a lot of debate among feminists, and some incitement provided chances to backlash while focusing on the sensationalism of the message, whether they emphasize the actual content. On the other hand, the Me Too movement and the movement to eradicate cyber sexual violence and the movement for the decriminalization of abortion are examples of synergies between online organizations and offline activities. Political changes and women's experiences influenced this. South Korea has historically experienced many large-scale democratization movements. In particular, in the 2000s, large-scale rallies were held intensively every 4 years. Political changes took place in a very short period of time, and many people have experienced participating in important historical changes, such as the impeachment of the president. However, many women experienced sexual harassment or disrespect at the rally. And in these political changes, women's demands were not taken seriously. So at the 2016 impeachment rally for former President Park Geun-hye, feminists organized a group called Feminism for feminist participants. And we announced the feminist declarations. In these feminist declarations, we declared that we will drive out the power that inherited her father's dictatorship, and we will start a new democracy with a feminist view. We also declared that we should no longer be limited to institutional democracy, but implement politics that effectively eliminate discrimination, inequality, and stigma against the social minorities with a feminist view. However, unfortunately, another male politician became president, and President Moon Jae-in declared that he would become a feminist president at the time of the election, but in reality, he did not fulfill as a feminist president throughout the political period. With this political changes, Korea's Me Too movement began. Prosecutor Seo Ji-hyun, who first appeared in TV and spoke publicly, gave an interview exposing the structure of the reality that violence for women continues despite these important political changes. Afterwards, there was a Me Too that An Hee-jung, a politician who was in the same political group as President Moon Jae-in, had sexually assaulted her female worker, who was his secretary, on several occasions. The Me Too movement continued in the cultural and artistic circles. The National Assembly, businesses, the media, and schools as well. And migrant women also accused the reality of numerous sexual assaults against migrant women in a structure that attempts to use both productive and reproductive labor of migrant women for maintaining a male-centered patriarchal system in South Korea. Massive rallies against cyber sexual violence and illegal filming that followed the Me Too movement also held many times, exposing the gender sexuality hierarchy and its violence in Korean society. And in the midst of this flow, the movement for the decriminalization of abortion proceeded. The important meaning of Korea's decriminalization movement is that it has achieved complete decriminalization rather than legalization under limited conditions. And we raised the issues of reproductive justice, breaking away from the frame of the fetus's right to life versus the women's right to decide. We exposed the contradiction of the state that promoted a strong birth control policy for economic development in the past, The state stipulated the abortion of people with disabilities as a condition of legal abortion in the Mother and Child Health Act in order to select only a productive population. So we declared if abortion is a crime, the criminal is the state. And by persuading the constitutional judges with the frame of reproductive justice, we led to decision and that the provisions which punish abortion are unconstitutional in 2019. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, the backlash groups against feminism and politicians who want to use the backlash for their approval rating are becoming an important issue. These graphs show the percentage of approval ratings among men and women in their 20s. Just looking at this table and graph, it looks like men in their 20s are supporting the opposition party because they think the Moon Jae-in government is a women-friendly government. But what do Korean social statistics actually show? In fact, it shows that the real problem is the very serious economic and social anxiety of the young generation. The biggest source of anxiety is the problem of jobs, and the second one is the problem of not being able to find the stable places to live. These issues are really important issues. But instead of taking responsibilities for these issues, politicians are just riding on the current anti-feminist backlash. They are acting like the spokesperson of young men and saying that we have to look at the men's damages as well. The attitude of these politicians is further reinforcing the anti-feminist backlash. So as we wrap up, we will talk about what to do. In the past few years, the feminist movement in South Korea has became widely known abroad, focusing on issues that have been raised and has had a significant impact on feminists in other countries as well. However, the reason why I emphasize the historical, political, and economical context while introducing the Korean feminist movement is that it is important to understand the regional context behind this movement because otherwise you simply cannot solidarity beyond the abstract empathy that women in the world are experiencing similar problems. When you understand the political, economic, and historical and social cultural background and context of the country, you can better understand the aspects and differences of the feminist movement, find specific points of society, and perform critical analysis. Perhaps the reason for this series of lecture is also to make this kind of understanding concrete. The feminist movement in Korean society was carried out together in the current of global feminism, but at the same time, political and economic changes unique to Korean society, changes in the gender sexuality hierarchy in the progress, and the context of meritocracy demanded by neoliberalism have been linked together. This symbol image is a figure that embodies a vagina. It is saying that let's become an ambitious vagina to become a successful woman. What do you think? Seeing this image? Being an ambitious, successful vagina is, of course, good, and this might empower women. However, it is difficult to say that the aim of feminism is to become a successful woman. This, I think, this reinforces reinforces the neoliberal meritocracy message again, instead of continuing to fight against the structural discrimination in society. For example, the Escape the Corset movement uh, has an important meaning because the movement breaks free from the sexuality control and gender roles for women. But on the other hand, if women will be trapped in the message that women can succeed by becoming similar to men, I think that is not feminist practice. Feminists must actively expose the political and economic problems underlying the control of gender sexuality and bring structural change. Taking the Me Too movement as an example, the reason why this problem continues to recur is that Korean society is still concentrating economic resources and power on men, which is acting as a structural force that enables control and violence against the women. So we need to change the structure of the art world that grants authority and subsidies centering on male directors, and we need to change the male-centered labor structure. We need to change the immigrant policy. Furthermore, we need to fundamentally change the family system centered on heterosexual and blood-related families. Only if we move on to a movement to change these things can the meaning of the Me Too movement not only acknowledges the victims or uh, punishes perpetrators, but leads to political and economic changes. However, the Korean government responses to the Me Too movement was limited to punishing the perpetrators, creating a reporting system for victims, and creating protection for women. The movement for the decriminalization of abortion is a good case that is not limited to one agenda, but has progressed in the direction of raising structural problems through feminism. Actually, in 2010, there was a movement demanding women's right to make decisions about pregnancy and childbirth. And I also have been participating in it from then on. However, when the movement resumed in 2016, we actively exposes that what the state has been doing is not a matter of protecting the life of the fetus or blocking of women's decision-making rights. We revealed the historical fact that the state has committed injustice and violence for the purpose of the country's population policy, while maintaining the punishment for crime of abortion. In the progress, people with disabilities and the poor were forcibly aborted or sterilized, and children born from unmarried women or born from relationships with black men were forcibly adopted abroad. And international adoption was another important source of income for the Korean government. By raising these issues together with the demands for the decriminalization of abortion, we were able to reveal that the issue of abortion is not just an individual issue of women, but a problem that needs to change the social structure together. So what we are demanding in a society where abortion is now decriminalized is not a frame of punishment permission frame, but a question of how to change injustice and guarantee practical sexual and reproductive rights from now on. And in the progress of such change, we are thinking about how to link these rights in various social systems such as education, labor, medical care, and social welfare. In this progress, as the composition of the problem changes, uh, the powers that could be united together and the social links and fields that could raise our issues could be expanded much more. And through this progress, women can become a political subject who raises issues related to various issues in the context of our life, such as disability, race, and class, rather than just being divided by gender. Feminism, I think, is a system transforming movement. I am chair and many activists from around the world acting for reproductive justice are actively connecting the issues of climate justice, border control, immigration policy, debt issues, the demands of the queer movement and disability movement with the movement for reproductive justice. So in the future, when we meet the flow of various feminist movements taking place in each country, I hope we can finding each other's political context and changes together and raise an important voice of solidarity that leads to systemic change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nayoung, so much for such a fascinating talk. You've not only touched upon the history of Korean feminism, the progress and the current problems, but more importantly, you've pointed out the way for feminism not only in Korea, but in other countries to go forward. And with the emphasis on intersectionality and the system transforming feminism, I think this is not only something that Korean feminism will stand for. I think it also applies to feminism in many other countries, especially considering the whole lectures that we've organized in the series. So last week, we have Professor Tara Patan who talks about the feminist movement in Myanmar and how people are actually using the kind of political turbulence to make their voices heard. And it's not only women, but also women from different marginalized groups. For example, the LGBTQ groups who were previously invisible in Myanmar, they were joining this movement, and also rural women who were previously kind of neglected in the urban, like middle, highly educated urban feminists who make their voices heard louder than the rural residents, right? So it has a lot to do with what we have discussed in this lecture series, and I hope our audience, if you have attended the previous lectures, can make connections. And we've already gathered quite